The 48th floor had its own weather. Sunday evening in January, and the city below Aurora Lounge was buried under 8 inches of fresh snow. Victoria Hale had arrived 4 minutes early, a habit she had never bothered to break, because punctuality, in her experience, was the cheapest form of dominance available to a person. She had chosen the window table. She always chose the window table. The man across from her had arrived first. That had been the first surprise. His name was Daniel Brooks, a mutual contact, her college roommate, Emily Carver, who had since become a family therapist in Evanston, had arranged the dinner with a brevity that was almost offensive. "He's smart, he's kind, he won't bore you." That was all. No resume, no LinkedIn profile forwarded in a message, no photograph. Victoria had accepted the invitation not because she trusted Emily's taste in men, but because her calendar had been empty on Sunday, and empty Sundays had started to feel like a personal failure. They had been talking for 20 minutes. He had not mentioned what he did for a living. He had not asked about her portfolio. He had asked whether she still found Chicago winters beautiful or whether, at some point, they had just become inconvenient. She had said she found them useful, that cold made people efficient. He had smiled at that, and the smile had been genuine rather than performed, which she found unexpectedly disconcerting. Then he mentioned his daughter, 7 years old. He'd been raising her alone for 4 years. He said it the way a person states the weather, not as confession, not as warning, but as simple fact. Victoria set her wine glass down with the precision of someone who had made up her mind. "I can't love a single dad," she said. She thought he would argue. She had phrased it as cleanly as possible, precisely to invite argument to end this quickly and without theater. But Daniel Brooks set his napkin on the table, flagged the server, and settled the entire bill before she had assembled a follow-up sentence. Then he reached into the inside breast pocket of his jacket and placed a white envelope beside her water glass. "Read it when you actually want to understand what you just said." He stood. He left. No anger. No performance of injury. Victoria sat with the envelope in a restaurant full of people who could not know what had just happened, and felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not shame, not indignation, but the particular discomfort of a question she did not have the answer to. Emily Carver had a gift for arrangements that looked casual and were not. Victoria had known her for 22 years. They had shared a dormitory room at Northwestern, survived 4 years of each other's worst decisions, and maintained a friendship that operated mostly through monthly dinners and the occasional blunt text message. Emily had been suggesting a blind date for approximately 3 years. Victoria had declined approximately 11 times. She had finally agreed in November, in a moment of uncharacteristic fatigue, with the understanding that she reserved the right to leave after 45 minutes if the conversation failed to justify staying. She had not expected to stay longer than 45 minutes. The reservation was at Aurora Lounge, where Victoria held certain categories of business dinners, altitude, and view to remind people of the correct power dynamic. It had occurred to her she was bringing the wrong frame of reference. She had chosen it anyway. Daniel Brooks was seated at the window table when she arrived. She had expected someone who would stand when she approached, who would do the slight overcorrection that men sometimes did in her presence when they had Googled her in the Uber on the way over. Daniel did stand, but without ceremony, and his handshake was the handshake of someone who had no particular theory about how to shake hands with Victoria Hale. He wore a dark navy suit with no tie, and his posture was the posture of a person comfortable in his own body without requiring an audience to confirm it. The first 10 minutes were, she would later admit, better than expected. He did not deploy any of the conversational strategies she had catalogued over years of these encounters. The false modesty about a recognizable accomplishment, the strategic mention of a mutual important contact, the careful pivot toward her work to demonstrate attentiveness. Instead, he asked about the book on her coat pocket. She had been reading a collection of essays on urban planning and had shoved it in her coat when she left the car. She told him she was reading it because she found herself increasingly skeptical that Chicago's lakefront development policies served anyone but the developers. He had a view on this. The view was specific and not derivative. She recalibrated slightly. The conversation moved through its natural stages, the city, her work in broad strokes, his work in a single sentence that she noted and filed away. Strategic consulting, small firm, mostly mid-market companies. He did not expand on it, which was unusual. Most men in his approximate professional universe either inflated or performed false deflation. He simply stated it and moved on, as though it were genuinely the least interesting thing about him. She was not sure whether that was confidence or concealment. The wine was a 2019 Burgundy that she had ordered without consulting him. He had glanced at the bottle when it arrived and made no comment, which told her he either did not know enough about wine to have an opinion or knew enough to know she didn't need one. She found herself hoping, briefly, it was the latter. Then the conversation shifted. It shifted the way good conversations sometimes do, not through a planned transition but through the natural exhaustion of surface material. They had been talking about the city, about work in abstract terms, about the long January evening pressing dark against the glass. There was a pause that did not feel uncomfortable, and in that pause, Daniel said, without particular setup, "I should tell you I have a daughter. She's 7. I've been raising her on my own for 4 years. Victoria heard it the way she heard market announcements. Clearly. Without affect, she set her wine glass down. The words came from a rule, not a feeling. That was important to understand about Victoria Hale. She had constructed her personal life with the same architecture she applied to her professional one, a set of principles derived from evidence, tested against experience, and adhered to without sentimentality. Sentiment was expensive. She had seen what it cost people the compromises made in its name, the careful erosion of capacity that followed from placing another person's chaos at the center of one's own structure. Single fathers were not a category of person she thought poorly of. She had no contempt for Daniel Brooks. She simply had a rule, and the rule was this: men with children from prior relationships carried a complexity that she could not budget for. There were custody schedules and medical emergencies, and the competing demands of a small human being whose needs would always and correctly supersede everything else. There was an ex-wife or a dead wife, each carrying its own species of complication. There was the daughter herself, a 7-year-old who would eventually have opinions about her father's life that would matter very much. Victoria had run the calculus years ago and arrived at a clean conclusion. "I can't love a single dad," she said. She kept her voice level. It was not cruelty. It was precision. Daniel looked at her for a moment. His expression did not change in the way she expected. He did not look wounded or defensive or the particular kind of coldly polite that men sometimes became when they had been rejected before they had a chance to perform adequacy. He looked, instead, faintly thoughtful, as though her statement had confirmed something he had already suspected. Then he asked, "Is that because you can't make room for someone else's past? Or because you've never had to make room for anyone at all?" Victoria did not answer. She did not answer because the question was better than she had anticipated. She had expected him to defend himself, to offer a rebuttal along the lines of, "It's not as complicated as you think," or "She's very easy," or "You'd love her if you met her," that she could have handled. Arguments could be dismissed. His question, however, had the structure of a mirror, and mirrors did not respond to dismissal. She noticed, distantly, that her hand was resting on the stem of her wineglass without moving. She had spent 20 years building a life where she did not have to make room for anyone. Her apartment, her schedule, her Sundays, relationships conducted on understood terms. No extensions, no renegotiation. She had never interrogated what that said about herself. "You should go," she said, not unkindly, but firmly, "the way you close a position that has moved against you." Daniel nodded once. He flagged the server. He paid the entire bill without making a gesture of it. Victoria watched him do it. There was no production, no slight pause to see whether she would offer to split it, no pointed look toward the check when it arrived. He simply handed over his card, signed, and pocketed his copy with the efficiency of someone concluding a meeting that had gone exactly as long as it was supposed to. The envelope appeared last. He took it from the inside pocket of his jacket, a plain white business envelope, unsealed, her name written on the front in a clean, unremarkable hand. He set it beside her water glass with the same deliberateness with which he had set everything else. Quietly, without drama, as a thing that simply needed to be placed somewhere. Read it when you actually want to understand what you just said. Then he stood, put on his coat, and walked toward the elevator without looking back. Victoria remained at the window table for 11 minutes. Outside, the snow had thickened, the city below gone soft through the condensation on the glass. The other tables were occupied with people conducting their own Sunday evenings. The envelope sat beside the water glass. She did not open it at the restaurant. Whatever was inside, she would not read it here, in a public room, without knowing what it contained. She put it in her coat pocket and settled what remained of the wine and took the elevator down to the lobby, where her driver had already pulled the car around. In the back seat, with the Chicago streets moving past in slow silence under the snow, she held the envelope in both hands and did not open it. She opened it at home, in the kitchen, at 11:47 p.m., standing at the counter in her coat because she had not yet taken it off. Inside the envelope was a single folded document, 8 pages, printed on standard paper, dense with numbers and annotations in the margins. It took her 30 seconds to identify the subject matter because the subject matter was familiar. North River Group, the acquisition, a logistics company in 3 Midwestern states that Hale Capital had been quietly positioning to absorb for 14 months, was not public knowledge. There were perhaps 40 people who knew the details of the deal structure, the timeline, the projected post-acquisition workforce reduction. Victoria was one of them. She was, in fact, the person who had approved the strategic framework that the analyst team had built the rest of the model on. The document in her hands was a detailed financial analysis of that framework. It was not a congratulatory assessment. The first 3 pages covered what she already knew: the acquisition rationale, the synergy projections, the margin improvement under the revised cost structure. Sound analysis, well constructed, no errors. Then the document turned. Pages 4 through 7 were a workforce impact analysis. It named the distribution centers, mapped the towns. Garrison, Illinois, 243 North River employees. Calvert, Indiana, 114 people in a facility operating since 1987, most over 40, most without transferable degrees, most with mortgages and children in the local schools. The final page was brief, 7 lines. The gist was this: the planned consolidation would eliminate 340 positions across 4 sites. Of those, fewer than 60 were in roles with transferable skill sets that the regional labor market could reasonably absorb. The remaining 280 faced, statistically, between 18 and 36 months of unemployment before finding comparable work if they found it at all. The 2 towns served by the largest facilities had no economic alternative of comparable scale within 40 miles. At the bottom of the last page, below the final data line, a single sentence in the same, unremarkable handwriting: "You're about to destroy hundreds of livelihoods just to win a deal." Victoria read it twice. Then she set the document on the counter and walked to the window and looked out at the snow-covered city for a long time. Every number in that analysis was correct. She knew because she had seen similar numbers in her own team's models, in the sections that the board presentations did not include. The numbers existed, they had simply not been presented as a reason to reconsider. She stood at the window for a while longer. Then she went to bed. She did not sleep well. Monday morning, 7:42 a.m. Victoria was at her desk at Hale Capital with a coffee she had not touched and a browser open to a search she had not expected to run. She typed the name, Daniel Brooks, Chicago, Strategic Consulting. The results were not what she had been prepared for. He was not a consultant in the way she had categorized the word. He was a founding partner at Meridian Crest Capital, $2.3 billion under management, with a documented thesis. No participation in acquisitions projected to result in mass layoffs greater than 15% of workforce, with particular avoidance of rural community impact. Consistent returns over 8 years. Not ethical theater, a feature they had built the fund around. Victoria read for 20 minutes without moving. Then she pulled the North River deal file and turned to the page she had not thought to turn to before, the Capital Partners roster. She had known, in abstract, that her team had been in conversation with a number of potential co-investors. She had not reviewed the full list recently. Meridian Crest Capital, listed as a priority target for the co-investment tranche. Outreach initiated 6 weeks ago. Status: no response. Victoria closed the folder. She understood now the precise geometry of Sunday evening. Daniel Brooks had known who she was before he sat down at that table. He had known about North River. He had agreed to the blind date not because Emily had arranged it or because he was looking for company on a Sunday, but because he had wanted to understand whether Victoria Hale was the person her fund's recent history suggested, or whether there was something else present that was worth understanding. She had answered that question definitively within the first 25 minutes. She sat with that for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and sent a message. He agreed to coffee the following Sunday. The location was his suggestion. A small place called Caldwell's on West Armitage, a neighborhood cafe with no particular design ambitions, where the coffee was good and the tables were close enough together that you kept your voice down automatically. Victoria arrived, again, 4 minutes early. Daniel was, again, already seated. She had prepared for this meeting. She had a proposal, a restructured co-investment framework, reducing projected workforce impact to roughly 90 positions, with a transition support commitment built in. The returns were lower. She had run the numbers twice. It was a genuine proposal. She had also brought a bottle of wine, because bringing nothing had felt like the wrong choice. She presented the proposal first. She walked through it efficiently, without theater, because that was how she communicated when the material was serious. Daniel listened. He did not interrupt. He asked 3 questions when she finished precise questions, the kind that suggested he had understood the document faster than most people in her office could have managed. Then he was quiet for a moment. He pushed the bottle of wine back across the table toward her. "I don't need gifts to have a conversation," he said. His voice was not unkind. It was simply direct. "I know," she said. "Then why did you bring it?" She did not have a clean answer for that. She had brought it because she was not sure the proposal alone was sufficient, which meant she had not been entirely confident in the proposal, which meant something she was not yet ready to name. "Habit," she said. He accepted this without comment. He looked at the proposal again. Then he said, "The workforce transition commitment on page 7. What's the enforcement mechanism? If the acquiring entity doesn't meet the support milestones, what's the recourse?" she told him. He listened. He said he would consider whether Meridian Crest's position had changed and that she would hear from him within 2 weeks. He stood to leave. She remained seated, her untouched coffee cooling in front of her. At the door, he paused, not turning around, and said, "The proposal is better than the original. Not because the numbers are cleaner, because it's trying to solve a different problem." Then he left, and the cafe returned to its ordinary Sunday noise, and Victoria sat with the bottle of wine between her hands and tried to decide whether she had made progress or simply moved the complexity somewhere she couldn't see it. The board met on Thursday. The North River acquisition had been on the agenda for 2 quarters. The deal was at a stage where delay carried real cost. Other buyers were circling. The seller's patience was finite, and the financing structure had a window that would not reopen cleanly after March. The board knew this. They had been patient because Victoria Hale's track record gave them a reason to be patient. But patience had a price, and they were presenting her with the invoice. The numbers were the numbers. $340 million in projected net return over a 5-year horizon under the original structure. The revised structure she had been working on delivered $261. The difference was not abstract. It was an $80 million conversation, and 3 members of the board were representing investors who had a very clear view of which side of that conversation they preferred to be on. The meeting ran 2 hours and 40 minutes. James Fortner, the lead independent director, put it plainly. "Victoria, you've built this firm on a clear thesis. We're being asked to deviate from it by a margin that is not small. If there's a strategic rationale, now would be the time." She told them she needed 72 hours. Fortner granted it in the tone of someone expecting to regret it. She called Lauren Marsh, her head of deal analysis, and asked for new projections. By morning, every permutation of workforce protection versus return the model could generate. Lauren asked no questions. That night, Victoria worked until 2 in the morning. She ate a sandwich at her desk. She did not answer any personal messages. At some point around midnight, she opened the desk drawer and looked at the 8-page document that she had brought into the office and kept there for the past week, and she read the last line again. "You're about to destroy hundreds of livelihoods just to win a deal." She put it back in the drawer. The following morning, Lauren was at her desk by 7 with 4 separate model runs printed and bound. Victoria read all 4. She marked the one she wanted. Then she called Fortner. The second board meeting was 26 minutes. Victoria walked in with a recommendation and made it without hedging. The proposal on the table would protect 223 of the projected 340 job losses. It achieved this through a phased consolidation structure that increased the timeline from 18 to 32 months. A regional reinvestment commitment of $12 million built into the acquisition terms, and a workforce transition partnership with a network of regional employers that Lauren's team had spent 3 days assembling from scratch. The return projection, $247 million over 6 years, $85 million fewer than the original, roughly 5.5 years to the same IRR. Fortner said, "You're asking us to extend the timeline, reduce the return, and commit capital to a social program that has no precedent in our fund's history." "What's changed?" Victoria said. "My analysis of what we're optimizing for." There was a silence. He called the vote, 4-3. The room was quiet afterward. Not hostile, the board was not in the business of hostility, but the quality of the quiet said something. She had spent 12 years building a relationship of trust with this table, and she had just complicated it in a way that would take time to work through. She accepted this. After the others had filed out, Fortner remained. "I'm not opposed to the decision," he said finally. "I want you to know that. I'm opposed to not understanding what produced it. When you're ready to explain it, I'd like to hear." She nodded. "When I'm ready." He left. She sat alone in the boardroom for a while. The city was visible through the windows, gray afternoon, light on gray January streets. The lake, flat and silver at the eastern edge of the skyline. She thought about a logistics hub in Garrison, Illinois, and 114 people in Calvert, Indiana, and the particular weight of a decision that had not been available to her 3 weeks ago because she had not known to ask for it. She was not sure what to call what she was feeling. Something between relief and the beginning of unfamiliar territory. She had made space for the first time in a long time. The event was called the January Jobs Collective, which was an earnest name for an earnest thing. A job fair and skills workshop organized by a coalition of Chicago nonprofits, serving workers displaced by corporate restructuring in the past 18 months. It was held in a converted warehouse near the Kinsey Street corridor, exposed brick, space heaters doing their best, folding tables and borrowed chairs, and the smell of donated coffee. Victoria had not planned to be there. She had cleared her Sunday afternoon without telling anyone where she was going, found a stack of folding chairs near the entrance, and began setting them up. No one asked who she was. She carried chairs, set out printed materials, directed 2 people to the resume workshop. She did not correct anyone's assumption that she was a volunteer. She had been there for approximately 40 minutes when she saw Daniel Brooks. He was seated at a table in the middle of the room, talking with a man in his 50s who had the look of someone who had spent decades doing physical work, wide hands, careful posture, the particular contained dignity of a person, maintaining composure through difficulty. Daniel was not performing anything. He was not deploying investor energy or consultant energy. He was simply sitting across from another person and listening to him with the whole of his attention. Victoria remained where she was for a moment. Then she went back to carrying chairs. When the main session was underway, a panel on regional employment resources that had drawn about 60 people to the rows of folding chairs, Victoria found herself at the coffee station at the same time as Daniel. He looked at her without surprise. Whether he had seen her earlier and said nothing, or whether her presence simply did not surprise him, she could not tell. "You stopped the layoffs," she said. It was not a question. He looked at her. "I heard. Lauren Marsh put out a release about the transition support framework on Friday. 223 jobs," she said. He was quiet for a moment, pouring his coffee. "Not all of them," he said. "No," she said. "Not all of them." There was a pause between them that was not uncomfortable. Outside, through the high warehouse windows, the January sky had gone a deep pewter color, and the last of the afternoon light was failing against the glass. "Why are you here?" he asked. Not accusatory, genuinely curious. She thought about the honest answer for a moment. "I wanted to see what it looked like from this side." He nodded slowly. "And? Clearer," she said. "It looks clearer." The event wound down around 5. People gathered their coats and said their careful goodbyes. The folding chairs were collected. Outside, the snow had started again, not the heavy accumulation of 3 weeks ago, but a fine, steady sifting that caught the orange of the streetlights. Victoria was pulling on her coat near the exit when Daniel appeared at her elbow. "Walk with me," he said. They walked west on Kinsey for a block and then turned south, moving with the unhurried pace of people, with nowhere in particular to be. The snow settled on the shoulders of their coats. The street was largely empty. Victoria spoke first. "I want to explain something," she said. "About what I said at the restaurant." He didn't hurry her. "It wasn't about you," she said, "or about your daughter. It was about a rule I'd made and never examined, because examining it would have meant looking at what it was protecting." She paused. "Rules feel cleaner than fear." "You said that." "I said it," he agreed. "You were right. I've spent a long time building a life where nothing unexpected can get in, and I called that efficiency. I called it strategy. But mostly, she stopped walking for a moment. They were at a corner, snow sifting down through the lamplight. Mostly, I was just afraid of what I'd have to give up if I let anything real into the space." He was quiet. Not filling the silence, just standing in it. "I'm sorry," she said. "For the sentence. Not because it was impolite, because it was dishonest, and you deserved better than that from someone across a table." He looked at her for a long moment. The snow was gathering on the brim of his coat collar. "I knew who you were when I sat down," he said. "I wanted to see if the person matched the fund's recent history, or if there was something more to understand. You answered that pretty quickly. I answered it badly. You answered it honestly," he said. "Which is more useful?" He paused. "For what it's worth, the proposal was good. Lauren Marsh's team built something solid. I passed it to 3 colleagues at Meridian Crest this week. We're reviewing the co-investment position again. She absorbed this. That's not why I came today, she said. I know, he said. That's partly why I asked you to walk. They continued south toward the river. The city moved around them in its Sunday evening rhythms, a couple with a dog, a taxi with its light on, the distant sound of something celebratory from a bar 2 streets over. The cold was absolute but not hostile, the kind of cold that makes the air very clear. Victoria thought about empty Sundays that felt like failure. She thought about 48 floors and a white envelope and 8 pages of numbers that had said something she had not been ready to hear until she was. She thought about a 7-year-old she had never met, who had somehow been present in this story from the beginning without ever appearing in it. She sounds formidable, Victoria said. Something in his expression shifted not dramatically, just the slight softening that happens when a person moves from one register to another. She's currently in a phase of believing everything can be fixed with more information. She's not entirely wrong. What's her name? Clara. Victoria considered this. That's a good name. They had reached the river. The water was dark and still, the snow catching the bridge lights and dissolving into it. They stood there for a moment, neither of them in any particular hurry. Coffee? He said. She looked at him. He was watching the river. There's a place on Michigan that stays open late, she said. Good coffee, no wine lists, no 48th floor. He smiled at that, the same genuine, unperformed smile from 3 weeks ago. That sounds right, he said. They crossed the bridge. There was no deal pending between them. There was no strategy, no framework, no structure built to manage what came next. There was only the snow and the river behind them, and 2 people walking into a Sunday evening that had not been planned, and was, for that reason, more honest than most of the things that had preceded it. Victoria had spent 20 years learning how to make a life without leaving room for anything that could surprise her. She was, she realized, perhaps ready to learn something else.